I never imagined a pulled muscle would be the reason everything in my life shifted, but looking back, that's exactly where it started. On an ordinary morning when my back locked up so subtly I couldn't even straighten myself without wincing. I wasn't new to pain. The warehouse where I worked didn't care much for ergonomics, and I'd spent enough time lifting boxes to know soreness like a familiar neighbor. But this pain was different, sharp, intrusive, like a warning that something deeper in my life was reaching its breaking point. My name is Jaron Hale, and I had become the kind of man who kept his head down and avoided mirrors. After a bitter breakup months earlier, I had let myself grow smaller in the world, convinced that the less space I took up, the fewer chances I had to be disappointed. My days were long, mechanical, stripped of color. I went from home to work, and sometimes to the little cafe across the street where I pretended the world didn't notice me. It was easier to be invisible than to risk being seen and misunderstood again. The injury forced me to do something I hated, ask for help. The clinic was only 3 blocks away, small and quiet, tucked between a bakery and an insurance office. When I stepped inside, the air felt too clean, too controlled. The soft scent of disinfectant mixed with something warm, maybe eucalyptus, and it filled me with a rare feeling of being in a space that knew how to take care of people, even if I didn't quite believe I deserved that care myself. The receptionist spoke with a gentle voice, guiding me through the paperwork I barely understood, and then led me to a waiting area with dim lights and muted colors. Everything felt intentional, like someone had carefully curated the space to ease people who were wrestling with discomfort. I sat there, hunched aside, feeling the throbbing pull in my back grow worse the longer I sat still. I tried to distract myself by studying the shadows on the wall, but my thoughts drifted somewhere else entirely, toward the ache in my chest I hadn't dealt with, toward the questions I had never answered, toward the version of myself I wasn't sure how to fix. When the door finally opened and the doctor stepped in, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention. He seemed to carry an air calm that followed him like a shadow. His name was Dr. Callum Rourke, and the first thing I noticed about him wasn't his face. This was a faceless story, after all, but rather the way he moved, deliberate and composed, like someone who didn't waste energy on anything unnecessary. He glanced at the chart in his hands, then at me, and something about that quiet, assessing pause made me feel unexpectedly seen. "Jaron, right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. There was no rush in it, no judgment, just a tone that suggested he spoke with people in pain every day and knew exactly how to help them feel less alone. I nodded, unsure why my throat felt tight. "Yeah, sorry, I'm just stiff today." "That's what I'm here for," he said. "We'll take this one step at a time." In another moment, maybe in another life, I might have found that reassuring. But standing there in his exam room, I felt exposed. Not because of anything he did wrong. Callum carried himself with professionalism that felt almost artistic. But because I wasn't used to people asking me about my pain with the intent of actually listening. He guided me gently through basic movements, bending, stretching, raising my arms, and I winced through all of it. He watched carefully, attentive without hovering, and his voice remained even as he explained which muscles were misaligned. Every word had purpose. Every instruction felt measured. Finally, he stepped back and said, "I need you to get on all fours. It'll help me check the pressure on your lower spine." The request froze me, not because it was inappropriate, but because it required a kind of vulnerability I wasn't used to sharing. Something about the position, the trust it demanded, made my pulse tick faster. For a moment, I wondered if he could sense the storm of emotion stirring beneath my quiet exterior. Callum must have noticed my hesitation, because he softened his tone. "It's just for the exam, I promise. You won't be in that position long, and I'll talk you through every step." There was nothing suggestive in his words, no undertone, no hidden meaning, just a professional offering reassurance. But the kindness in his voice tugged at something inside me, something fragile and neglected. I exhaled slowly and nodded. As I lowered myself onto the padded table, bracing my weight on my palms and knees, I felt the ache in my back intensify. My breaths grew shorter, shaky. Callum placed a hand lightly on the center of my spine, not pressing, just anchoring me, and guided me through small shifts in posture. The touch wasn't intimate, but it carried a warmth I hadn't felt in months. a warmth that seeped past my skin and into the hollow places I had tried so hard to ignore. "You're doing good," he murmured. "Just breathe." I did. For the first time that day, I breathed. The pain flared when he pressed on a particular spot, sending a sharp spark down my side. I flinched, instinctively tensing. "That's the area we need to work on," he said softly. "You're holding so much tension there. You don't have to hold it alone." I didn't know if he meant physically or emotionally, but the words echoed in a place deeper than muscle. After the exam, he helped me sit upright. No rush, no impatience, no cold detachment. He gave me exercises, explained my options, and scheduled a follow-up appointment. Everything about the interaction should have been routine, clinical, forgettable. But as I stepped out of the room, something inside me shifted so subtly I almost missed it. Callum had seen me, really seen me, even though I tried so hard being visible. And that small act of being acknowledged, of being treated gently, left me walking down the hallway with a strange sense of unease and an even stranger curiosity. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, vulnerable on all fours under the soft lights of the clinic, was the quiet beginning of a story that would unravel every wall I built around my heart. And I wasn't sure whether to feel terrified or hopeful about what would come next. The second appointment came quicker than I expected, and though I told myself it was only for my back, something deeper tugged at me as I walked toward the clinic. I tried to ignore the way my chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. But every step reminded me that meeting someone who treated me with genuine care was rare enough to unsettle my carefully controlled world. I wasn't used to feeling seen, and I definitely wasn't used to wanting to be seen again. When I entered the clinic, the receptionist smiled knowingly, as if she could sense the subtle shift in my demeanor. Maybe I wasn't as unreadable as I thought. She directed me to the same room, and the moment I stepped inside, Callum looked up from his notes. His posture relaxed when he saw me, like my presence eased something in him too. I didn't know why that mattered, but it did. "You made it," he said, and the warmth in his voice carved itself into the quiet corners of my chest. "Didn't have much of a choice," I replied, attempting humor. My back still acting like it has something personal against me. His laugh, soft, controlled, unforced, made the room feel less sterile. "Let's see what we can do about that." The session felt different this time, more familiar. Maybe it was the way he explained things slowly, making sure I understood each step. Maybe it was the small moments of silence where neither of us felt the need to fill the air with meaningless words. Or maybe it was the way his steady presence anchored me as he guided my movements with careful precision. There was a new layer to our interaction, trust growing in the quiet spaces between instructions. As he worked, we talked lightly. Nothing too personal at first. Favorite foods, growing up in different parts of the country, stories from work we didn't mind sharing. But even casual conversation felt intimate when the person across from you listened like every word you said held meaning. "What about you?" I asked at one point, turning the question back to him after he asked about my siblings. "Any family around here?" He paused, his hand stilling slightly before resuming. "Not anymore," he said. "Just me now." I sensed a barrier there, something heavy resting behind the simplicity of his words. I didn't push. I knew what it felt like to hold things close, because letting them out only made them real. But a quiet part of me wanted to understand the shape of the pain behind his calm eyes, even if he wasn't ready to reveal it. Toward the end of the session, a sharp pain shot through my back as he pressed on a tense knot. My breath hitched, and Callum immediately eased off. "Sorry," I muttered, embarrassed that something so small had shaken me visibly. "Don't apologize for hurting," he said gently. "It's my job to help you through it, not to ignore it." He showed me how to breathe through the tension, grounding me with silent patience. For a moment, I wasn't just a patient. I was someone he genuinely cared about helping. That realization sent a ripple through me, soft, unsettling, and strangely comforting. Then, just as the air settled into something almost peaceful, his phone vibrated on the counter. A brief glance at the screen tightened his expression, shifting the energy in the room. He picked up quickly, turning it slightly away from me, and whatever message he read pulled his calm face into a shadowed seriousness I hadn't seen before. Everything in me stilled. He put the phone down slowly, as if he had to consciously force himself to return to the moment. "Sorry about that," he said, though he didn't offer an explanation. "It's fine," I replied, though it didn't feel fine at all. The quiet between us suddenly felt heavier, like an invisible curtain had dropped without warning. He continued the session, but his attention seemed divided, not unfocused. Callum wasn't the type to be careless, but something behind his eyes pulled at him, something that had nothing to do with me or my pain. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was none of my business, but the shift lingered in the room like a faint echo of something unspoken. When the session ended, he handed me a new set of stretches and instructions to help improve my mobility. I nodded along, but my attention drifted back to that message. It was ridiculous to feel affected. After all, I barely knew him, but connection had a strange way of taking root before you even realized it had found fertile ground. As I reached the door, he stopped me. "Jaren," he said, and something in his voice almost sounded like hesitation. "Let me know if the pain gets worse. Don't wait until the next appointment." "I won't," I said. "Thanks." He nodded, but the look in his eyes stayed with me as I walked out, a mix of concern, distraction, and something that resembled regret. The days that followed felt longer than usual. Work blurred into routine, but my mind kept replaying the way he looked at his phone, the way the air in the room had shifted. Each thought left me feeling foolish and frustrated. I didn't want to be the kind of person who read too much into a moment, yet it was impossible to ignore how unsettled it left me. By the time my next appointment came around, I wasn't sure if I was more nervous about him treating my back or about facing the unanswered questions hanging between us. I walked into the clinic with a mix of eagerness and reluctance, hoping the warmth I'd felt before hadn't been nothing more than an illusion. But as I reached the door of the exam room, I heard Callum's voice from inside, quiet, troubled, and speaking to someone on the phone. "I don't know if I can go through this again," he said, his tone laced with a strain I had never heard from him. "You can't just come back like nothing happened." My hand froze on the door. I didn't know who he was talking to, but in that moment, I realized something undeniable. Whatever was going on in his life wasn't small, and it wasn't over. And somehow, without meaning to, I had stepped far closer to it than I intended. Callum didn't come back for almost 10 minutes, and every second stretched like a quiet accusation. I sat on the exam table, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of the tangled threads of his past that had suddenly knotted themselves into the present. I told myself that none of this, Dorian, the history, the heartbreak, concerned me, but the truth was harder to swallow. I had become invested, maybe too quickly, maybe too deeply, and now the consequences were starting to surface. When Callum returned, his face had settled into its usual calm, but I could see the cracks in it. He was holding himself together with the kind of deliberate effort people use when they are afraid the smallest touch will make everything fall apart. "Sorry about that," he said, voice steady but thin. "Let's continue." I wanted to protest, to tell him he didn't need to pretend in front of me, but I also knew he had walls built long before I stepped into his life. Instead, I followed his instructions as he guided me through stretches and pressure tests. His hands were steady, but the silence between us was different now. No longer gentle or comfortable. It was charged, heavy, filled with everything neither of us knew how to say. At one point, he paused mid-motion and rested both hands on his knees. "Jaren," he said slowly, "I don't want you getting the wrong idea about anything that happened today." I swallowed hard. The wrong idea. My chest tightened. I didn't assume anything. He lifted his gaze, uncertainty flickering across his features. "Dorian is complicated. You don't owe me a backstory," I replied, though the words felt like shards in my throat. He nodded, but his next breath came shaky. "I know, but I don't want to hurt you by accident." The sentence hit with more force than I expected. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even a confession, but it was honest, and honesty can be more dangerous than desire. I didn't know what to do with the warmth and ache it sparked inside me. "You haven't hurt me," I said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand where I stand." For a moment, he looked like he might actually tell me, like he was weighing the risk of pulling back the curtain just enough to let me inside. But then he exhaled long and slow, and the hesitation returned. "You're my patient," he said, but the words didn't hold conviction. "And I can't cross certain lines." I nodded, pretending not to feel the sting. "Right, professional boundaries." He looked away. "It's more than that." But he didn't elaborate. The rest of the session moved with a fragile kind of rhythm, each movement careful and restrained. When it ended, he walked me to the door like always, but this time his hand hovered near my back as though he wanted to offer something, comfort, reassurance, maybe even connection, but wasn't sure he had the right. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. "You too," I replied. But what I wanted to say was, let me be the one who helps you do that. When I stepped outside, the air felt colder than usual. The sidewalk was busy, but the world sounded muted, distant. I walked without direction, without purpose, replaying every look, every hesitation, every moment that had shifted the space between us. I didn't know what bothered me more, the presence of Dorian, or the realization that I had started caring about what place I held in Callum's life. I was halfway down the block when I heard someone call my name. "Jaren." I turned around to find Callum jogging toward me, his expression tense, urgent. He stopped a few steps away, breathing unevenly, not from exertion but from something far more emotional. "There's something I need to say," he said, voice trembling in a way I had never heard from him. I should have said it earlier. I waited, heart beating too fast. "I'm not in a place to start anything," he began. "Not with you, not with anyone." The words hit like cold water, but I forced myself to nod. "But," he continued, "I don't want you to walk away thinking you imagined everything, because you didn't." My breath caught. He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. I felt something, too. I've been trying not to. I've been trying to keep things clean and simple. But life isn't built that way, and I'm tired pretending it is. The wind moved between us like a quiet witness. "Dorian coming back. It shook me," he admitted. Not because I want him back, but because it reminded me how badly I was hurt, and how afraid I am of letting someone in again. The vulnerability in his voice unraveled something inside me. "Callum," I said softly, "I'm not asking for anything from you. Not now. Not yet. I just didn't want to get caught in something that still belongs to someone else." His eyes softened, and for the first time all day, the distance between us felt bridgeable. "It doesn't," he whispered. "Not anymore." The city moved around us. Cars passing, people talking, life continuing. But the moment felt suspended, quiet, like a breath held between two choices. He exhaled shakily. "I need time to figure out what comes next." "Then take your time," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." Something eased in him at those words, something that had been locked up for far too long. He gave a small, almost shy smile. "I'll text you," he said, "not as your doctor, but as someone who wants to talk to you." My heart stuttered. "I'd like that," I said. He nodded, stepping back, but the look he gave me was unmistakably one of promise. Uncertain, fragile, hopeful. As he walked away, I realized that the central conflict wasn't just about Dorian or heartbreak or boundaries. It was about two people learning how to trust again. And though the story wasn't finished, not even close, it had finally taken a turn towards something deeper, something real, something I want to follow no matter where it led. The room was silent until the chain creaked. Not loudly, not violently, just a faint metallic tremor drifting through the cold air, as if the stone chamber itself exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. Moisture clung to the walls like a second skin. The torchlight flickered in thin, trembling lines, revealing a narrow corridor where the Empire stored what it did not wish the world to see. Here, beneath the towering halls of Ottoman authority, punishment was not a spectacle. It was a whisper, a ritual, a message carved into the body so that the pain, not the words, would speak for the state. But tonight, the chamber held only one man, Mehmet, a small-town tax collector who had dared to falsify imperial records. His crime was not rebellion. It was not treason. It was arrogance, believing he could manipulate a system older than his lineage, older than his village, older than the map he lived on. Standing over him was a Sabesai, the local enforcer whose duty was to translate imperial law into human experience. His expression was calm, almost dispassionate. He was not here to be cruel. He was here to be precise. The Empire did not hire sadists. It hired instruments. Mehmet's breath quivered as he looked at the wooden pole placed on the ground beside him. 2 soldiers lifted his legs. The coarse rope scraped against his skin as they bound his ankles and hoisted them upward. His hands strained against the cold floor. The position felt unnatural, humiliating, designed to expose the most vulnerable, least protected part of a man. Falaka. He had heard the word before, always whispered, always distant, always a caution rather than a sentence. But the moment the thought attached itself to his own body, something inside him collapsed. The stories had not been exaggerations. The stories had been gentle. The Sabesai lifted the rod. It was smooth, worn from use, and terribly ordinary, almost disappointing in its simplicity. Mehmet knew enough about cruelty to understand this truth. The worst instruments were always the simplest. The first strike landed with a dull, fleshy thud. No scream, only a sharp inhale that scraped against his lungs like broken salt. Pain erupted in a wave that felt too bright, too immediate, as though the nerves had been waiting, coiled, anticipating their turn to speak. The second strike came more swiftly, then the third, and by the fourth, Mehmet's voice finally broke free, echoing against the stone, swallowed almost instantly by the heavy air. The chamber did not need to be loud. The punishment did not require blood. It needed endurance, his and theirs. Each strike was not only retribution, but instruction, a lesson delivered through repetition, through the swelling of flesh, through the way the soul, soft, nerve-rich, unprotected, turned into conduits for imperial authority. The body always remembered what the mind tried to forget. And above it all, the fear, not fear of death. Fear that pain had no end because the hand wielding it had no hatred, only duty. The Sabesai maintained a steady rhythm, neither cruel nor sympathetic. He did not flinch when Mehmet begged. He did not respond when Mehmet cursed. His mind was elsewhere, anchored in the belief that this act served the empire's balance. If corruption spread, society fractured. If society fractured, the empire weakened. If the empire weakened, everything fell. Mehmet's voice finally thinned into hoarse gasps. The torch crackled softly, as though respecting the fading sound. The soldiers lowered his legs, the ropes loosening with a dry whisper. He could not stand. His feet trembled violently when they touched the floor, as if the earth itself were too sharp to bear. Yet this was not the true punishment. It was only the prelude. Pain fades, but humiliation lingers. They lifted him by the arms and dragged him up the narrow staircase, the light growing brighter with each step. He squinted as they reached the street. Morning had come, though it looked pale and indifferent. The townspeople were already gathering. News traveled quickly in small places. A market woman paused mid-step. A baker wiped flour from his hands. Children watched silently, sensing the gravity without understanding it. He was not displayed for gore. He was displayed for memory. The Sabesai announced his crime in a steady tone, misreporting taxes, defrauding the state, exploiting the poor. None of the accusations surprised Mehmet, but hearing them spoken aloud, with the weight of law behind them, hollowed him further than the punishment itself. He stood there trembling, his feet throbbing with each heartbeat, as whispers crawled to the crowd like insects. Not pity, not outrage, recognition. They knew he had done it. They knew this was a cost. Somewhere in the crowd, a young boy gripped his mother's sleeve. Somewhere else, an elder shook his head. The town absorbed the lesson without needing to speak. The empire's justice was not always public, but when it was, the message resonated far beyond the square. A single punished official could stabilize an entire community, or destabilize it. Fear and order often walked the same narrow road. As Mehmet stood under the open sky, the memory of the chamber below clung to him like damp smoke. The chains' faint rattle, the torch's trembling flame, the rod descending again and again with mechanical indifference. He could still hear it behind his heartbeat. He did not know what awaited him next. Fines, imprisonment, exile, or release. But a truth had taken shape inside him with chilling clarity. The empire did not need to kill to break a man. Sometimes it only needed to remind him that he belonged to it. The crowd began to disperse. Life resumed. Laughter returned cautiously to the edges of the market. But Mehmet remained there for a moment longer, unable to step forward, unsure if he feared the pain in his feet or the eyes he felt on his back. When he finally turned to hobble away, the Sabesai watched with a face carved from stone, not victorious, not regretful, simply aware that justice, in this world, was measured not by mercy or cruelty, but by the maintenance of order. And somewhere beneath the cobblestones he walked upon, the iron chain in the darkness below swayed gently, as if remembering him, reminding him that silence always learned to scream before it learned to obey.